I'm spoiled.
Well, yeah.
Okay, which make it fine, I think it'd be. If we can finish by 8, if that works. And so I guess the first item on the agenda is for public comments for items not on the agenda for discussion but not action. Nope, okay, so we don't have any takers on that, so the next, number 3 on the agenda is town reports. And Lisa did provide a town administrator's report, and I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Lisa?
No, so the TA report just has a couple of things, I'm not gonna bother reading through all of them. Just kind of the regular stuff about, a couple of committee board members that we still need. We have transitioned to municipal emails for all select board members, town employees, and most recently, we have transitioned to now the chair of the quasi judicial boards, planning board and Board of Adjustment Appeals. They are set up to have those meetings, or I'm sorry, those email addresses be town email addresses. Each email address, there is a cost associated with it due to protection and tracking and everything like that. And so that's a discussion to have going into the budget process to see to what extent does the board want to commit to provide municipal email address to the rest of the municipal boards? So that will be a discussion that we will bring up through the budget process.
And Vika, it's a monthly subscription, is that?
It's a monthly cost per email, and so we're looking at it's I believe, I could be wrong, it's $9 or $10, it's $9 per email address per month. But with that comes a lot of this cybersecurity protection and having the accessibility and the assistance through ION. And well, it is an investment that has increased over the last couple of years of the budget process, especially for the volunteer positions like yourself and other ones. What it does is it really keeps those volunteers more protected from having to use their personal email addresses. So in the case of freedom of access request, you're not having to give up your entire email address and all of your personal information potentially having to go through. It's just a municipal email address, and that's also cloud-based, so everything is saved, everything is protected. So depending on how secure the municipality wants to be and the direction that it wants to go in, it's definitely a discussion to see to what extent you want to keep moving in that and or stop with where we are now. Chandler's Dock, there's been a lot of back and forth. Harbor Master did notify the fishermen again today. There were a couple of boats that were tied up down there. They did start or plan to start working about a week earlier than originally anticipated. So we've been in contact with anybody that would have been impacted and affected. In the case of CMP coming out or the fireboat from Long Island coming out, Bancroft is well aware and has communicated independently with those individuals to make sure that at any given case, if there's a location that needs to be tied up at Chandler's and the floats aren't available, that is an option. And I think next week we'll probably, hopefully next week we'll get an update relative to how long it's gonna take and what the inconvenience might be, but the communication that they've had with the parties impacted has been really great. And then the only other thing is with the holidays coming up next week and the week after are, there are some closures, so the town office and the transfer station, which transfer station, minimal impact there, with a couple hours, but, those offices in the town office will be closed for Thursday, December 25th, and, Thursday, January 1st for the holidays. So, and so for TA report, that's all I have. There'll be a couple of things under communications that I'll share when we get closer to that.
Anybody have any questions on the TA report? Okay, so we're gonna move on to the first agenda item, which is 25-113, to hear a report on chronic vandalism and theft of town road signs and to discuss proposed actions. And in the packet is a pretty detailed memo from Vika about sort of the chronic problem we've had with road sign damage. And then she also mentions at the end of the memo, the issue recently was some vandalism down at Chandler's beach. So I guess I will open it up to discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, how was Chandler's Beach accessed with the rocks there? Was it down through the path? Or-
So the beach, after Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving holiday, the beach itself didn't have the vandalism that it had throughout the summer. Throughout the summer, there was a lot of big bonfires on the beach and in the drive-in area. Thanksgiving break, after that initial storm, there was a lot of driving that took place in there, and I ended up driving down there to taking a look at it. So somebody went down there and just did donuts. So rather than using the driving, the physical road, they just spun a lot.
I'm sorry, on
And
the beach?
Yes.
Yeah, not on the beach.
No,
on the
no,
up-
yes, in the upland area.
So the beach has been vandalized due to bonfires. I mean, I spent a lot of time there during the summertime, and this past summer, almost every time we went around and picked up a lot of debris relative to burned cans,
Yeah.
glass, things like that. There were a lot of, they would go to Chandler's dock and take a lot of the supplies down there from Cascavel that burn a lot of the wood.
So I would
Go ahead.
propose, I know we've talked, the signage is a problem. One way to perhaps help the signage is to put a big warning on it. Removal of the sign is subject to whatever felony value the dollar amount is worth. You know, I hate to think we're going this way, but since we are a small town with not a real police presence, that we may have to start using what you suggested before about having monitors, cameras around. Unfortunately, that's the way the world's going, but this is becoming a chronic problem. So now is the time to have to respond with, maybe Chandler's Beach has a camera looking at it to look for bonfires.
After the rocks were moved, the first couple of times, I think twice they were moved when they were initially placed. We put, Public Works Department put up some deer cameras, game cameras up. And we were able to get footage of who did it, and those individuals were talked to, and whether it's a coincidence or not, but those rocks have not been moved since.
So, but to put that information on the sign so people know, don't, you know, there's consequences for you to either taking the sign down or disobeying the sign by saying this area is monitored and the fine is up to $1,000 or whatever it is.
Well, I say I wouldn't advise that they're telling them that it's monitored to say, because then sort of defeats the purpose. We'll start looking for cameras, we vandalize the cameras. you know, that just progresses. I think the bottom line is we have to nail a couple people. It's like most things, you know, you get a couple people and the word gets out and then it stops. I think we should be putting up cameras where we know there's problems. And, you know, then the question is, you know, what kind of investment is that? You know, it'd be really nice if they were the kind that actually send stuff, you know, by cell or whatever, not that every work, I mean, Island's great with cell, but. So you don't have to physically go down and climb up wherever the camera is and get it down, but. You know, absolutely, because it's a property of the town and the people that live in this town, and the few bad apples that are. Creating the problem, and I would like to catch them and put an end to it, much like you did with, down in Chandler, so I mean.
The most common location. That I can think of where signs are being repeatedly taken is around Bennett's Cove area. So the four-way intersection, those stop signs, that stop sign seems to be probably the most frequent sign that's being removed. So if there is, you know, if the board does make the decision to go in some direction, that might be a good location to do something, or even maybe a couple other locations that are more discreet so that people aren't expecting to have something there that they know they're gonna get caught on.
We're so much at the transition between being an island community where people could do whatever they wanted on any piece of property. And I think that this is part of that legacy that is still happening. People upset that they can't access and use what is now public property, what is public property in any way that they want, that's been done in the past. So I think that finding a way to balance having cameras and balance enforcing the law, and also a pretty heavy dose of being able to have honest conversations with people who are involved in it is important. So I think it needs to be all of those things. But I also think it would be good to have a public knowledge about how much this is costing the town. So when we tally the cost of all of these signs that are having to be replaced, and not just the cost of the signs, but the cost of the time and labor to have them put in, that you want that to, for me, that needs to be a big part of the conversation. And also from a safety point of view, that needs to be covered as well, that it's a safety issue when vehicles are coming off the barge and they don't know that we have speed limits and stop signs. So there's no, they drive like they're in the Wild West because there's nothing that tells them otherwise. So, you know, being able to communicate with people about the safety implications and the financial implications. But I think that would be good to have it be a part of the conversation as well. I have to say, I think some cameras are a good idea because that's easy enough to do. And they could be moved around, and I think that's a useful way of doing it, because when you have somebody on video, it's irrefutable proof. So
I was wondering if we could maybe ask Public Works their thoughts on. It's you're the staff that deals with this.
So I think I told Vika in the past 6 months, we probably had 12 signs, either pulled up or just driven over. They get disposed of on Chandler's Beach or in the woods around Chandler's parking area or in the gully off of Chandler's. The latest one, the barge parking, no idling, is off of Chandler's dock in the water. You can see it at low tide. We'll try to get that retrieved when conditions are appropriate with somebody with a skiff. We retrieve back a lot of them, but some of them we do not. The Chandler's turnaround parking area is where they tend to have their fires. Fire department was called once because it was left smoldering in the morning hours. There's, as Vika pointed, donuts and turnarounds, many beer cans thrown everywhere. Maybe we even just put a garbage can out there, because they'll use a garbage can. But as far as the signage itself, the problem is power. You put batteries up there, they don't even last a week because it's going 24/7. So they need the solar power, which now makes that game camera more visible.
Yeah.
There's no leaves on the trees right now. Pretty much anybody could walk by and see it because it's got the big solar power.
Yeah.
Power source for it. The only way to maybe get around that is by putting it up high enough. And then do we have access to put it up high enough? Game cameras that really give good image 24/7, you know, as Erhard said, you know, so you can read it through your phone, they're easily $200 to $250 a piece. So you invest in 3 or 4 of those for the different areas because they don't have a wide scope of field. You know, you're easily talking a $500 or $1,000 investment. You can't put the signs back in the wintertime because the ground's frozen. So every sign that's basically come out in the last month or two, they're just waiting for spring thaw to put them back in. They constantly took out the stop sign at Bennett's Cove, and we had the camera on the stop sign at Bennett's Cove. So they took out the no barging sign instead. Again, the cameras only have so much of the field of view in order to get any detail.
So Jeff, what would you describe as the real problem areas on the island?
Chandler's parking area and Bennett's Cove intersection. Although Jenks Road, they drove over that sign 3 weeks ago, and that was just left there. Again, wherever there's nobody to see them. And Bennett's Cove in that intersection, there really doesn't have any visibility, as well as the Chandler's turnaround drive-through area. Yes, sir.
What would you say, you know, typical sign? Between your labor and the materials, what do you think the cost of one of the signs is?
Where all signs come on.
They're gonna vary, because if you look at a standard stop sign that you can buy, those signs are typically anywhere between like $50 and $100. If you have the posts that you're buying, then it's an additional cost. For a while, a few years ago, we invested in some of the posts that were supposed to be indestructible. And what they did is they just took a saw and they sawed it down right at the ground level. With some custom signs, they're more expensive. I don't know if anybody remembers, but Stone Pier, coming from Stone Pier, there used to be a sign that would say kind of congested area, share the road, bikers, golfers, things like that. Those are more custom signs, which could vary into upwards couple $100. So it really depends on the type of signs. We have not had, so I believe the year I started as a town administrator, that budget process, road signs budget was eliminated, so we don't have a large budget line item for road signs. And so what we've done is we've bought road signs to fit within a budget that are standard road signs that are gonna be stop signs that posts and things like that. But when it comes to some of the custom signs, we haven't invested back in any of those because those are gonna really bring the costs up a little bit higher than what a typical $100 road sign is.
Well, the reason I asked the question is that basically, one of the signs, even a standard sign, plus the labor to put it back, especially to the pole involved and whatever.
Right, it takes two
This is-
people,
Right, is as much or more than a camera.
correct?
So to me, I mean, the investment seems pretty simple, that the camera's the way to go, and most, I know the hunting cameras, and I assume some of the more. Higher end cameras, I mean, they can be motion activated. As long as they're within reasonable proximity, and. I mean, my battery life, I've gotten 2 seasons out of mine with plenty of deer on them. So. I don't know, I think it's worth a try. And I know they make ones that are sort of 360, do a 360 thing, if you're gonna go with like a solar powered one, that might be the way to go, where you wanna be able to see if somebody's vandalizing it. But, and that's assuming that, you have some sort of remote uplink or whatever, so the
Right.
footage is.
So I did a brief research and the best one under reviews, it allows you with the app, you can tilt it and angle it, once it's up there. The problem is getting it out of reach. So like you said earlier, they just don't take it or shoot it or throw rocks at it.
Shooting.
Yeah.
I think I would agree though, it's sort of worth a try, it's not a $10,000 investment, so I think. It seemed to work to some extent, in deterring people from doing things previously, so it might be worth a try. I do think that it might present itself as a challenge to some individuals on the island, and so we have to kind of expect in a way. Yeah, it might even increase things, but. I guess what I'm looking for from the board would be to have sort of a specific recommendation to the town administrator on next steps for this. I don't think we need a motion, but I think sort of giving some clear direction on where we wanna go. So, I think we heard that the two, Bennett's Cove, particularly intersection at Bennett's Road and Chandler's are probably the high priority areas. So that's just 2 locations, so what do folks think we should do?
I mean, it was me and it was my property, I would put 2 cameras in each place, one that's maybe a little bit more obvious and one that's really not obvious, because I'd really like to know. If somebody is gonna go through trouble to take out a camera, then we're really getting into sort of criminal behavior. And I do have a problem with it. But find the most suitable camera, maybe next time we get together, you've done some research and we could look at. What are some products that may work, and. Maybe a couple of cameras at each location. And see how it goes.
And I guess just to add to that, I think to make it, remotely accessible, even though that's more expensive, makes sense. So that we're not adding to the workload for
Right.
particularly Public Works or anybody else. So I know that that's a risk because it could disappear, but I do think, sort of buying something that's pretty self-sufficient and that we could access, whoever access, and I think we should limit the access to the camera, so it isn't sort of abused.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so anyway, and I think that then in terms of timing, it's probably wouldn't be till the spring till we would install these, right?
Right.
Realistically,
It could be end of winter,
yeah,
before the population base increases again. Again, the trick is to
yeah, you're right.
install them and without people seeing them installed.
Okay.
Does that feel like enough direction for
So
you?
does the board want us to research and bring back some recommendations of physical cameras to recommend for purchase?
Yeah, sure,
Is that what I'm hearing?
sure.
And I like the idea of having 2 cameras just to access people going down the road into Chandler's. And then it's also if there was any way to be checking if there's any damage, it would be possible to see which vehicles were coming in and out of there. So maybe for Chandler's, it's accessing that road as much as it is catching people in the act. And I think that's what I'd like to see. But yes, I like the idea of accessing what is available for cameras. I mean, are there cameras that are suitable that can be, like, it's pretty easy to see a deer cam, which I have. It's pretty easy to see that, but are there other,
You're putting them right at eye level, right? I mean,
Right.
Not putting them up in.
right,
Oh, yeah.
but, anyway, so I'd like to have a good idea of what's available that other municipalities are using. And, I like the idea of having cameras that access the areas.
Okay. Richard, anything else to add?
No, I would wonder about looking at a camera that access like Chandler's Road, there's nothing criminal about going down the road.
There's
Yeah.
nothing criminal about going down, you're right. Anyway, I think that, it's the act of people who are bored
Yeah.
and need something better to do and are angry for a variety of reasons. And the town is a target, and I think that tightening the noose is not always the way to cause deterrence. It's gonna be engagement and a conversation, and which is why I like the idea of letting everybody know just how much it costs and
Yeah.
the safety things, so that those can be conversations that people have.
So is that something you'd be willing to take on, sort of the engagement part?
Yes, if someone else will do it with me, I would love
Yeah,
to.
well, I think the board could, we could work with you, but I think
Yeah,
if that's
like-
something you feel is important, maybe at the next time we take this up, you could carry that piece and
Yeah.
Nico will look into and Jeff into the hardware side.
Well, also, Jeff, if you could give or Rico both, kind of the cost, estimated cost to date of, whether it's 6 month or 12 month period. And definitely include the labor part, because that's not insignificant.
Right,
And David, anything you wanna add?
Only that,
For a while.
last time we looked into this, we did talk to some of the other municipalities and they all have the same problem.
Oh.
And they're all dealing with it in the same way we're trying to deal with it now. And, seems to me the only solution is to never have signs up and, let people figure out which way Chandler's is, and that's not a solution. So I'm thinking about the technical aspects and the cost involved. It's certainly worth a try to put up some more, modern, ways of figuring out who's doing what. And I like the idea that we look into it a little bit further and recognize that it's gonna cost money if we really want to address it.
Yeah. And to me, we can see when we get there, but this is where a selectmen's contingency fund might be a good source of funds, because it's not a lot of money, but at the same time, the select board is like saying this is a priority for us.
Yeah.
Well, so I think we could, if you wanna come back, you and Jeff or whoever, come back with sort of some idea of what the cost is and locations, and I think we do have to kind of balance. I think you wanna be a little stealth on this so that it's effective, so I think leave it up to the town. For that, but, and I think when it fits into your schedule, we'll come back with a proposal. That sound good?
Yeah.
And when the time comes, if we are gonna move forward and purchase something, then we would have to have a motion to expend the time. So is everybody settled on that for now?
Yeah.
Move on, okay, so the next item on the agenda is 25-114. Review and approval of updated budget and select board meeting calendar, so we've got to put it in our packet in the form of a calendar, monthly calendar, which I like, because then I can, that. And there were a few edits that we made based on some feedback from the school committee and just our discussions and, how things have been adjusted, so. The changes that you made, we showed in red.
There's only a couple of changes and they are in red. And that is the school providing feedback in terms of when a meeting with the school would work best for them. And recognizing that maybe 2 meetings is not necessary, but rather having 1 meeting with them about the budget earlier on, and then the second meeting be the joint presentation. And so, that was proposed for, happening on March 3rd for the meeting with the school. And then, having the joint budget presentation on May 13th, which is the same time frame that it took place last year, which is the justification for that date. And so those are in red, and if the board is okay with it, if those dates work, then we can finalize that, and this could be the final budget schedule that will work for the school and the town.
So are any comments on the proposed schedule or, issues? And I think the joint meeting on the 13th, we also potentially envision the finance committee being a presenter also. So I think it would be more just the school in the town. So, we could check with them and make sure they're interested. But I think we want to kind of formulate about the schedule tonight, exactly, before the motion.
If it works for the board, yeah, it would be great too, whether it's a motion, whether you kind of collectively, if there's, a motion is not required for the adoption, but if you want to, then that's totally fine. But one way or another, having a collective agreement that this is the schedule that you wanna move forward with.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Yeah, the motion.
yeah, and I guess before, well, go ahead, yeah, we can have a motion. Why don't we just do it as a motion? That way, we're sort of committing to it, guys.
Sure.
Yep, Richard?
I move that we approve the updated budget and select board meeting calendar.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Second from Earhart, any more discussion? And I guess before we move off, I would like to talk to the finance committee and just make sure the schedule works for them. Since you're kind of in.
I'm sure we'll make it work.
Okay,
All right.
we did give you another week in January, so we hope that was, was a good thing. Okay, all right, so all in favor? All right, good. And thanks for doing that. And so those will go up on the town website, right, those dates?
Yeah.
On the calendar, so the public will know
Yeah.
well ahead of time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then,
they're already on it, the right ones were the only ones that need to be, incorporated in it now that you've agreed with it.
and so the other thing is, there is, I think, a pretty important meeting on Wednesday, the 14th, when the finance committee makes their presentation. I was just wondering what our game plan is for notifying the community. So I don't know, Richard, did you submit your thing already?
No, because I realized it'd be nice to add stuff.
Yeah, so I think we could put that in Richard's, so Richard wrote a monthly report.
Yeah.
And so I think adding the fact that what we usually do at the end of that or have done is add the meetings that are coming up. Or in the month of January related to the select board. So I think you could list the meetings, but what I would be happy to do is just write up a short paragraph and submit that to the calendar that's separate
Oh, that.
about the meeting. And that way it will sort of hit people in two places. Does that sound good?
So I should also mention the dates.
Yeah, so if you look back on the older reports, we just at the very end had like, the upcoming meetings with the select board are blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Here's where you find the information on that kind of thing, so, and I apologize, because I haven't sent you any comments, I think we did, and anyway, I think that does need to be submitted by new time on the. Yeah, so it means that I think anybody who has comments for Richard, needs to go back to him tomorrow. So we don't, we ran up against the clock on these every time, at least
I've heard about this clock.
I'm not a good example, but I appreciate you doing that, and so if you would find on the bottom, just adding the meetings that are on this calendar, that would be good for them, we just do it for that month, January.
Oh, for January.
I was thinking of sending out a text alert.
Yeah.
Having some kind of a separate, so we usually do on a weekly basis upcoming meetings, but for this, maybe utilize somebody like Loretta or somebody that can provide some kind of a cut sheet, more of a visual that we can have that could be up for several weeks around the places. And then possibly even go into the extent of maybe sending out a notice in mailboxes. There's not gonna be as many people. There is a little cost associated, but it might be worth it. The one thing that is worth mentioning to that, so the finance committee is gonna be doing the presentation about that. We did reach out to Mark Roy, who's been assisting us with finances, and he is going to attend that meeting as well. So he will be present for that meeting also, so.
So I think, I think sending out a postcard, which is $110 or something, postage and printing would make sense, and so. I don't know who, I mean, I could do it, but I think Lorraine would probably enjoy doing it, so, she could put together a postcard, and do people feel like a mailing a week or so ahead of time, or, you know, after the first of the year, so people know that meeting is.
Yes, as soon after, yeah.
Yeah, so the first week of June. I don't know what the mail delivery schedule is. Still see, we're getting our mail pretty much every day.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we'll do that. I think we'll move on then. So everybody's good with the calendar. And if people have conflicts, you know, that's what happens, you know. I think last year we moved the calendar, we moved the dates around a lot, and I didn't think that was a good practice.
Yeah.
Because it got so confused.
Yeah.
So I think those are the dates. If you can't make it, that's the way it goes.
While we're on that, I have a conflict that falls in March, but it's not with a budget schedule, it's with a regular select board meeting. So for March, I will be going on a family vacation, March 10th through the 17th, which the week that I'll be gone is the week that we usually compile an agenda for select board meeting. Krista is also, our clerk is gonna be gone, so Chris is gonna be holding the town office afloat. And so I was wondering if the select would be comfortable enough if we possibly try to just have one regular select board meeting that month. Just because there will be a meeting with the school, there will be a Saturday meeting with the nonprofits, and there will be a third draft of the capital requests. So there will be several meetings, and so I'll just, if the board is okay with it, just try to stagger it enough that there is one regular select board meeting, or if you wanna push it to another time, that's fine. It's just realistically the timing for me to returning on the 17th to then be at a meeting that I will not be able to prep for the week before
To have,
might make it
Well,
difficult.
that, so I'm not here the 18th anyway.
right, that's right, I knew you were gone, so I think we can, why don't we take it off the calendar and then we can add it. Sometimes we've had very short meetings to enact, you know, to do a couple things that haven't happened, you know, that could happen where we have to meet to sign a couple documents or something. But
So which meeting will we be?
It will be March 18th, Wednesday, March 18th, which is the second, it's a regular select board meeting, so not budget associated, just a regular select board meeting.
Here, one of my suggestions, since that gives us only one regular meeting in March and only one regular meeting in the month of April, that if it's needed, we could have one on the first Wednesday of that month. If
yeah,
needed.
actually, April 1st, it makes sense to have a select board.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
So I guess on here, April, so the select board meeting, and this is where that was my mistake for crossing it off. April, it would still be a scheduled on the 1st and the
Okay.
15th regular select board meetings.
okay,
The cross off was because that was originally the joint meeting with the school. So
Right.
April 1st would still be considered a regular scheduled select board meeting.
okay,
Great.
then good, have a nice vacation, in my opinion.
Yeah, we'll be, I mean, I think we'll be pretty busy, plus we have a Saturday meeting that month, so I think that works for me, but we can add meetings, but what I don't wanna do is change the dates of the meeting, because
Yeah.
it was not easy to follow last year.
What's the Saturday meeting?
The Saturday meeting is March 7th, and that's the nonprofit.
Oh,
And,
Yeah.
and it's just sometimes coming in on Saturday morning, a little non-productive. So any other comments on that? So I don't think, you know, I think we're good. So we're gonna move on to the next agenda item, which is 25-1 15. So this, I just wanted, this is the form we used last year for the nonprofit, so that item is to review and approve of the nonprofit fiscal year 27 funding request form. So this grew out of kind of a long history of first, not really any particular structure to the request from the nonprofits, and then we moved into like asking them all to submit financial information. I think there were a couple years, we got hundreds of pages from people with their financial information, and that was hard for the board to kind of manage. So I think it was last year we adopted this form to kind of help standardize what people submit, and I think Bob and Vika pretty much put this together. But I wanted to run it by the board, before we send it out to the nonprofits, and so, because I think we asked them to return it by February 1st, right?
Yeah, it was in February and, so this form is nearly exactly what was done last year. Krista went in and incorporated a couple of additional things that had been requested last year to make it a little bit more inclusive by putting in kind of the rationale and a couple things that are on the second page. So Krista did assist with trying to make it a little bit more streamlined, so.
And the concept for this form is that it is select board for approving, basically, giving public funds to these organizations. We should at least, we have some responsibility, first of all, to make sure they're used properly, but also to make sure that the entity needs the money and, that sort of the request is justified. And I do think that at some point, we might be reviewing kind of how we do this. I think it's on the finance committee's list of things, but it's not our highest priority right now in terms of looking at how the nonprofit allocations are figured out. Right now, like last year's budget was, we allocated $180,000 to nonprofit organizations on the island. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. And it's partly just a function of how we became, we separated from Cumberland, and a lot of these things existed as nonprofits because, we weren't our own independent municipality, particularly the library and the rec center would be good examples. So bottom line is, this is just, it's the information that we will use to evaluate the financial requests from the organizations. I think my recollection is, because it did sort of cause me to pause when I read it again this year, but if the select board agrees to bring a warrant article to annual town meeting recommending a contribution to said nonprofit as long as the conditions of this agreement are met. And I think that was added in part so that somebody doesn't submit spend a ton of time, submit information, and then we say, oops, sorry. Doesn't say that we're gonna fund their request, it just says we will contribute. So I'm just pointing that out, that we are making that commitment, because this is in the form of a memorandum of understanding. So it was kind of an upfront way to say, what do you need for money? What are you gonna do with it? Provide some background, and if that's all, whatever the board agrees in terms of the allotment, then this will become the agreement. And we only had that historically with the rec center. And so now we decided we should really extend it to anybody who would money to. So any changes or comments or questions?
Yes. I am aware of the last meeting, I said that I would look at this, and I've been having a great time going on a trip, so I'm back in the game now. I just really want to let you know. The one thing I wanted to ask for is asking specifically, what are the deliverables for the benefit of the community? So when it says, how will this impact on the community and who will benefit? I like to have that phrased in terms of what are the benefits that will be delivered to the community?
Okay.
So I'd be glad to wordsmith that and send it to you. But that way we can say, well, this is what this organization is able to provide to the community. This is maybe ask for them in order of priority, but I think having that be really clear statements that this is how this is what they're delivering to the community. Because I think that's where the value is. And when we look at the number of people that are using the library, the number of families impacted by the island commons and all of these organizations, I think that's a good way to keep track of it.
So I think if you wanna provide some suggested edits, if you could send them to me, give a copy of the board.
Okay.
That way we all know, and if somebody has heartburn, they can talk to you directly, but I doubt it. And so I think, and do you have a date, because I know your people would like to get the email out to these organizations, so when
Okay.
would you like to see that by?
Right.
I would like to see this document finalized before Christmas.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so I think anybody else who has some additions or changes they'd like to see. One thing I wonder, we could make this like a fillable PDF, is that?
It should be, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And that way, though, if people wanna write more, they have more space. Okay. And then, I don't know, did you have a signature line on this in the past, or what? I see the question.
No, we did have a signature line in the past, and that's something, that in tweaking, Krista had asked if it is something that, would be necessary, and this really more line comes in line with some of the other documents that we have. It just streamlines to have them be all similar by having the signatures.
I think it's a good.
And
idea.
it would be helpful just to know, maybe have the chair of the board or the executive director or whoever is the lead of that nonprofit. Put an official signature on it, so it's not just a bunch of, PDFs being sent to us with this, it's
Yeah.
a little bit more accountable.
Would electronic signatures work? Yeah.
But it could just be said, but what we'd like to be able to do is go back in time and say, this was 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and this is who signed it,
Yeah.
having that history, yeah.
Yeah, we
But I
don't,
think only the one person from the organization would be the executive director, whomever.
Or the chair,
The president of the
chair of the
board.
board, yeah.
Okay,
well, we need so the question is, select board also, do we need to sign it? or-
Yeah. It would be probably the chair of the select board and, yeah. But we would, that will be, that workshop, prior to that workshop, we'll receive these, and then it will be our job to review those, and if we have changes or questions, we're not gonna just sign it.
Well, and maybe want the signature by the select board goes on and one as kind of the final stamp of approval, verification that the select board has agreed on these terms and these documents, and then this is the final information being put forth to town meeting for voter.
is this an application, or are we signing it once it's approved?
It's both, and that was the upside down, actually, I think it's a good strategy, in other words, they have to supply this information for us to really evaluate the, amount we wanna fund, and so why not just make that sort of the basis for an MOU? And the only thing that they'll have a request, and we might not fully fund that request, so that would be the major thing that would change, but it also provides the documentation, for, like you say, kind of future generations of how we made those decisions.
And for what is being provided to the town, because in many ways, our nonprofits are providing services to our community members that are not. That are being supported by the town, but not being paid for by the.
But by the same token, we have a responsibility to all of the taxpayers, and so we have to, this is a situation where we're using public funds to fund nonprofit organizations, so I think we have an obligation to kind of do our due diligence.
Thank you.
It's an MOU because we, in approving it, we were essentially agreeing to bring it to town meeting.
Correct.
So that's, so there's agreement on our side.
I think we have to bear in mind that our community is unusual in that we have all these organizations because quite frankly, Cumberland wouldn't give them to us,
Right.
so we had to build our own.
Right.
And so I think it's important for us to keep in mind that, we're not only dealing with other organizations, we're dealing with what would normally be in our court.
Correct. And I think that's where, you know, it's gonna be also our responsibility to make sure they deliver on the things that they've committed to. So that would be part of the discussion as we review these proposals, so. I agree, it's a unique situation because of the way we came to be. Yeah, good point. Okay, so I think, so where we're at on that is Eliza Jane has some changes she'd like to make, and she'll send that to everyone, including the board and Vika, and then I think once Vika or Krista will incorporate those comments and we'll consider that sort of time, so that Vika can send that out to the organization. Because we're asking for them to submit their information by the beginning of February. Okay. Fortunately, they saw it last year, so I think it won't be a surprise. Moving on then to the next item on the agenda, 25-116. This is to hear a report on the status of the fiscal year 25 account reconciliation and the balance of the undesignated fund. So this is Vika and Andrew have been working with Mark to, finalize and reconcile fiscal year 25. We're in fiscal year 26 right now, so this is last year's accounting, and it's so that we can really, understand where we ended up at the end of fiscal year 25. You might recall we got fired by our auditor, so we did, have an auditor right now. But Mark's recommendation was that we get sort of our financial house in order, and it will make the next audit much easier. And I can see the light at the end of the tunnel on that, because he's right. I think it's not a big lift to do an audit once you've really had everything, reconciled and kind of easy to follow. And based on the questions he's asked me, I think he's really getting into the very nitty gritty of a lot of the, accounts, and then he made some recommendations on some changes. So Vika, you can give us a summary. We had a short meeting with him today.
Yeah, we met with him this morning, and then Andrew and I did talk to him for a few more minutes after Kara left, and historically, since we've been in town, we've just had everything under one general fund, so our reserve accounts, our grants, and FEMA money, which has been, considering where we are now with grants and federal funding allocation, we're in a really great position. We have a lot of money that we've been given with all the work that's been put in to receive it, but that has contributed to really creating a mess to the general fund. What he has done is he basically created, instead of one general fund, there's now 6 different funds. And so you've got the general fund, you've got the admin, the school, capital, special revenues, FEMA. So all of these different allocations are going to be in their own funds, but they're all going to be intertwined and connected. So it's going to make things a lot easier in terms of having a better understanding of how everything comes and goes, and then what the final numbers are at the end. So a lot less predicting, but also a lot better numbers in terms of knowing where things stand. Through the process of that, I think he has been able to clean things up in a way that were nearly impossible with the way everything was clumped together in one pool. And with his level of expertise, Andrew and I combined times 10, we don't have it. And so it's been really valuable in terms of what he has done. And so he has reclassified the fund balance. He's done a lot of work, but it's been today, when after Carol got off, when he really went through and showed it to us, it was overwhelming to see, but it was really exciting to see, because I think it's just I'm fully confident that 2027 fiscal year, where it's just gonna be smooth sailing, because we're just gonna be so much more prepared, and everything is gonna be so much more organized in that process. What we have found out is we have, so while the numbers aren't final yet, the undesignated fund balance is gonna be significantly higher than what we anticipated. So we're gonna have surplus of money that we weren't expecting, whereas we were more concerned and thinking that we were gonna have to be on the low end, which is really gonna put the town in a great position and having additional funds for the undesignated fund to reallocate to other areas. And it could, whether it's reserve accounts, whether it's taking some of those funds and putting it towards something like South Shore Drive, so that you're not having to ask taxpayers to cover those costs. It's just, I think it's gonna make it a little bit easier having some funds that we really weren't expecting to have to that extent, it, you know, in the future to use. Moving forward, he has a few things that he needs to tidy up for fiscal year 25, and then fiscal year 25 is gonna be in a really good shape. And then at that point, what we're gonna do is we're gonna reclassify and change a lot of that for fiscal year 26. And so then when it comes to fiscal year 27 budget, we'll be in a good standing in terms of having everything lined up and have everything aligned. So we will hopefully be a little bit more organized and ultimately save a little bit less time kind of doing things behind the scene and have things be a little bit more prepared coming towards your direction.
And I guess one of the things I heard too that he said was that we really should have a separate actual bank account for some of the grant funds, in particular the FEMA money. And, you know, that it makes it much cleaner, and we have the high potential of getting audited on that project and also any other federal funds, especially in the current climate. So I think the timing is really optimal that he stepped on board when we got this big FEMA award, and also the $1 million earmark, which is federal money. So that the earmark comes through Shelley Finger's office, but it's just like if we applied for a grant project and got awarded. So we have to meet all those requirements. And so that's, you know, it's a pretty heavy lift. And so he's familiar with that. And I think it's fortunate for us that we weren't further down the track on some of these expenditures, because it would be a little.
I'm glad we have not used any of that FEMA money yet, because it's gonna make it easier for reporting when the time comes. And so I had contacted the bank about opening up another account. I followed up with her today, and I'm gonna probably try to connect with her on a call before the holidays to see whether we're in a better position to open up kind of a separate checking account where we have separate checks and everything go into that, or whether it's separate accounts similar to what we have the reserve accounts. So on the bank end, what would be the best way for us to have those accounts be open? And then what we'll have is we'll have our general checking account, but then we'll also have a separate account where we'll transfer the FEMA money in, and then when we receive the congressional spending money, we'll have a separate account that money will be in. So it's not just all pooled in one big account, which I think long-term will make reconciliation a lot simpler and a lot easier, because right now we have one fund where we have reserve accounts, where we have grants, and we have the general fund, which is expense and revenue, is the town, the school. And it just, if one account is off, it throws the reconciliation off, which I think has contributed to why reconciliation has been so difficult over the last year or two. And so I do think this is gonna make it a little bit, actually not a little bit, a lot easier and a lot more transparent, and make the whole entire process a little bit smoother on the bookkeeping end of things.
And then we did ask them a question today that came up at the last meeting about, you know, say we wanna have general engineering services. We don't necessarily know what it's gonna be in fiscal year 27, and maybe you remember what he said about that? Cause it was different than I didn't realize we could set it up this way.
So what he recommended is that we set up a separate general fund, so for general engineering services specifically, have a separate general fund. So you would have kind of classified undesignated fund, balance, and then unclassified, which is undesignated fund balance. Undesignated fund balance is the pool of money that is left over that isn't assigned. The assigned is, you know, the $200,000 or $250,000, whatever the number that the board recommends to put towards revenue for costing, for offsetting the taxes. And so in line with that, created a separate general fund and have that pool of money be in there. But have that be connected with a very specific warrant article, which that warrant article you will see as a first time coming in the January 24, we're gonna have that article at the January 24 special town meeting. And that article is gonna be very specific to the extent of, and this is kind of fallen in line relative to, the warrant articles for special town meeting. And so the article would be very specific in saying that it would be used for certain things. So it's not gonna be like a contingency fund where the board can selectively use it for whatever. It would be for specific use. But then have the language be so that it is transferable from one year to the next. So what that would mean is if you allocate $80,000, and I'm using that just as a number, for that fund. In this special town meeting, and then by the end of this fiscal year, if we only expend $36,000. That difference at the end of the fiscal year, because it's unused, isn't gonna go to the undesignated fund. That difference is gonna roll over and still be allowed to be used in next fiscal year for the same type of things. And the recommendation was that with every town meeting, have those warrant articles be in it. So it's very transparent and it makes it easy for us to keep track of that information, which is what we're gonna do with this special town meeting.
And did I hear you say that that could specifically be for engineering services? Or
It could be anything.
is that,
It
could be anything?
Anything, but with the special town meeting coming up, what it will be is, it will be, you know, I will do a sample warrant article to you and a sample town warrant to you. And that language will be specific and it will be for, engineering services, and I'll think of language and I'll look at other sample things. I might even reach out to him for a recommendation, but yes.
Okay, so for example, I've just come to appreciate so much how important these engineering services are to make sure that what we want to do can be done and how much it will cost. And to make sure, I mean, at some point, I would assume that could be a position in the town, contracted or otherwise. But for me, as a select board person, it seems like we would keep track of that better. And it also would do better to not have to take it out of contingency. But one of my questions is, if it's for a public works project, would it, like, if we had a certain amount of money designated for a public works project, could the engineering study come out of that instead? Well, like for the stone pier, I would assume we're gonna run into issues, for example, with the stone pier, where we'll need additional engineering services. Would that fall under this fund or would it?
That will come out of under stone pier. So general contracted services right now is, so for example, when I reach out to GEI and I emailed them and asked them to provide a professional opinion and review the proposal for Waldo Point Road.
Okay,
That's gonna take time and effort and money on their end that they're gonna charge us. We don't have allocation for those kind of day in and day out expenses.
Yeah.
To be able to utilize their professional services.
so this
Or-
way it gets tracked all in one place.
It's
Or that-
Kinda,
It's a different mechanism. So basically for big project specific stuff like the Stone Pier and even South Shore Drive, those engineering costs are in that project.
Okay,
But
and they'll
for
remain.
what we're looking for is the parking that we did at Jenks Road, for example, so that didn't exist anywhere, and, you know. There drainage on South Road right here, so those things, otherwise we have to keep, you know, either we set up a fund that's an account in the operating budget that's sort of, you know, general engineering services. But this, I think this mechanism is better in that it sort of identifies it as a specific, it's almost like a reserve account, except that it's kind of treated differently, I guess
Yeah.
that's how, oh,
Okay.
and so given the whole thing, Mark is gonna be at the meeting on the 14th, and I think, you know. He can explain some of these things to us, he talks very fast and he's pretty sharp, so you gotta really pay attention, but I think. I'm not sure exactly what his presentation is gonna entail, but it's probably better if he explains these things, because, you know, he's the one who's been going through the accounts, but. I think there are some things like that where we do need to set up. You know, some accounts that we can access for services that we don't have on our staff. That's how I would envision it, so even potentially planning or, and engineering is a big one.
Found for a similar reserve.
It's similar,
It's similar to a reserve account, but he said that with reserve accounts, when it comes to accounting audits and kind of government and IRS and things like that. With reserve accounts, you're really looking at capital expenses that you're saving up, and something like general contracted services
I
is
see.
not.
I see.
And so he even,
yeah, so we.
with the revaluation that we've set aside, and we have, in his opinion, well, he is recommending that it's just stay there now because that's where it is. A reevaluation is not something that he would have considered and something that he would have typically put into a reserve account. So, but how do you set aside funds for things like that? Knowing that you might not necessarily always use them within the fiscal year and not. And explaining it to the taxpayers in a way where you're not receiving, like with every tax year, with every annual town meeting, you're asking $80,000 for, you know. And it's kind of a one-time thing, and that's why he recommended with every town meeting, you put that warrant article in with that dollar amount. So you see the trajectory of the change, and then that way it's very transparent when it comes time to needing to ask if the time comes to appropriate more money in those funds, that there is a really clear record of that information being in annual town meeting versus just in our general
Okay.
expense budget.
So it's just a different slot for, but when he explained it, it made sense to me. And
Yes.
so I think,
Okay.
so I guess the bottom line on, the status of the fiscal year account reconciliation, he's pretty much there. We're not in trouble with the balance in our undesignated fund.
That's the
And,
good news.
you know, he will come, so he should be done shortly. And then he will be at the January 14th meeting. To sort of, because I think everybody on the board, I think the board and the finance committee should meet him because he's become a pretty key player. And also I want to be sure you're comfortable because he's, you know, making all these changes to our accounting practices and, you know, we're putting a lot of stock and faith in his activities. So we need to, you all need to feel comfortable with his work. So, and so far, so good as far as I can tell, but you know, I think the finance committee could also provide some, you know, oversight and make sure they're good with it. So. Any questions on that?
I'd just like to say thank you. This has been a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's pretty disruptive, I think, for the accounting and particularly Stephen and Andrew and the office. It's kind of a mess right now for them because things are gonna be reclassified, but once it's established, I think it will be good.
Yeah, there might be a little bit of a hiccup in terms of with us starting the fiscal year 27 budget. I'm in fiscal year 26 and I put in the anticipated proposed numbers. And those accounts I still have to talk to him, we might have to wait, because once fiscal year 25 is finalized, all of the recreation that he's done will need to be done in fiscal year 26. So I still have to see with him, and I'm gonna wait till he's done with fiscal year 25 to see what the timing aligns in terms of when I start inputting numbers, which typically I've already started doing it at this point, but I'm not, because I don't wanna put in proposed numbers for anticipated fiscal year 27, only to have several and majority of those accounts be changed and then having to redo it, and so as nerve wracking as it is, knowing that it's only really a couple of weeks before you're getting your first draft of the fiscal year 27 budget, I think it's for the best, because I think if I do it otherwise, it's just gonna be recreating the work that's not necessary, so. I'm really looking forward to see what he changes and how that really moves things around, and. Knowing that there is, in his opinion, with what he's done, a surplus is. Makes it even a little bit more confident that, you know. I'd rather have more money than less money, so.
Again, I just would like to say, this is a part of the process of going from a toddler to a child, to a teenager, to a young adult town.
But we have a babysitter.
And it seems like,
Yeah, but I would find a babysitter.
right, so it sounds like it's a good investment in
Yeah.
young adulthood.
And it's, you know, I think just one thing worth mentioning, it's not really to undermine in any way the previous
Right, absolutely.
work that was done or the previous administrators. I think what had been set up worked
At the time.
until it didn't. And we're at the point where, you know, improvements are needed to be made to really bring us in line with what the current changes are.
15 years.
So when you think of like kind of using your analogy of going, you know, teenager, young adult. You know, we all went through with our checking accounts and, you know, I mean, there was a time where as long as I had more than I thought I had in the bank, that was fine, there was no reconciliation to be had. And then eventually that didn't work anymore, you know, and we started. Fixing it, getting things like quick and then.
Yep.
So we're sort of doing that.
Good.
All right, so I think, all good news is happening. So we'll move on to 25-117. So this, I wanted the board to weigh in on the warrant articles. We'll hear from Vika. So the town meeting has been scheduled for, this is a special town meeting for January 24th. And there are some specific things that, Nicole mentioned that we want to put on this town meeting, and then I want to make sure there are not any other things that the board feels we should be bringing up at that meeting. So I'll turn it over to Vika and we'll figure out.
So after today's conversation and with the few things that, I already had on the list, some anticipated recommendation that I will be bringing to you is, so one is going to be to, abandon the reserve account that holds, about $90,000 for the solar array purchase, because the finance committee did recommend not to buy out the solar array. So the money is there to be reallocated. And I did ask Mark's opinion, and instead of, accessing undesignated fund balance, I'm going to propose that the select board, and this will be for you ultimately to decide and bring forth to the voters, is to abandon that reserve account and reallocate that money towards that general fund account that we were just talking about. So that will be one. There are currently 2 reserve accounts based on the work that he has done that are in the negatives. Despite the fact that our physical bank account is showing them in the positives. The fund, the general fund accounts and how he's cleaned them up. And based on the end of year closing and where things stand. So for example, the public works equipment reserve account is currently in the negative, and so what I asked him is, should I go back? Because I'm pretty confident that they shouldn't be in the negative, it's as a result of maybe a mistake that was done due to the town has historically focused on keeping track of the reserve accounts through the bank, not as closely through the Trio general fund location, which we learned today was a mistake. And that's more or less from how we learned to do it, which is fine, but those numbers need to be fixed. And so his recommendation or my suggestion of, do I go back through several previous years of town warrants and figure out where that mistake was made and bring that and change it? And he said, no, because these are the numbers based on how the audits have closed. And so the best recommendation is to, because you have such a large surplus, is reallocate some of the money into those accounts to bring them current, because with like public works account, fiscal year 25, currently it's saying that it's in the negative, which I'm confident that it's not supposed to be, but it is what it is. But in fiscal year 26, we allocated money into that account to buy a truck. And so we don't wanna bring forth that negative until fiscal year 26 and then have it be skewed. And so a recommendation is to reallocate some of the surplus, whether it's from the fund of the solar array or whether it's from undesignated fund, and just bring that account to a positive. So then when we transition into fiscal year 26 books, and that $50,000 is added that was allocated by the voters towards the truck, then that brings the number to current to where it needs to be. So there is, and then with the school and the purchase of a bus, I have to kind of connect with the superintendent to see how they chose to do things, because how they can transfer money is very different from how the select board doesn't have the same level of authority to transfer money between departments that the school does. And so I wouldn't feel comfortable bringing forth any kind of recommendation about that particular account until I have a better understanding and I sit down and it's a recommendation from the superintendent in line. So that's gonna be one that you probably haven't seen, which will be a warrant article, and then.
Could you tell us what the amounts are, I mean, approximately for the overdraw on the public works and the overdraw on the school?
So I believe the public works, it was, negative 11,000. With the school, it was in the $40,000 range, which I think with the school, it might be because they have the ability to transfer funds between departments. So that might be a matter of just looking at a motion within a school board meeting that they made to do that, that doesn't necessarily come to a town meeting vote, because they have some additional authority that would necessarily require a town meeting.
And I would say that that authority, I mean, the voters, town meeting gave them that authority a few years ago, and I personally am not a big fan of it because, so we can only transfer, what is it, 10, I mean, we can only exceed our departmental budgets by 10% or something.
No more than 10%.
Right, and so a few years ago, the school included this warrant article to basically give them complete latitude to move money laterally within their accounts, you know, the full budget. And that's a $1.4 million budget, and I didn't think that was a good idea, and I don't think I opposed it at a town meeting. Somebody did, I can't remember who it was. But I think it's a discussion that maybe we should all have, the school committee and the finance committee, because I think the voters need some guardrails on, you know, the money's allocated for building maintenance, it shouldn't get spent on transportation. So I didn't like it when it happened, and here's how it's been implemented. And it's not, and Mark basically started off by saying, can't be done. And so that was his initial reaction, and I said, well, we passed this weird out warrant article, and so maybe it isn't legal, but I don't think it's a good practice. And so that's something we should discuss, because I don't think we wanna be using money from, one completely different purpose to another. It's just not a good idea.
Right, and when did that pass?
It was,
I think it was this previous June.
It was.
I think it was 2 years ago.
25, I think, was the first time that it was.
Oh, maybe,
Well,
okay,
there was some language
yeah,
this last June that I said,
oh, maybe.
isn't this backwards?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. that's
Aaron
right.
said, no, that's the way it is. And basically it was, well, that's unrestricted, what you can do.
Right, and I don't think that's a good idea,
Right.
and I think we should, and maybe they had this plan in mind. And so even more of I mean, I think you should be more transparent with the taxpayers. If you need to do something, make a purchase that wasn't anticipated, go to the taxpayers and say, this is what we wanna do. But at any rate, that's a conversation we can have with the school committee, and I think once we get an idea of, what's happening, that's sort of a separate policy thing. But for a town meeting coming up, I think Vika is saying she needs to find out basically whether that was legitimate or not, and then that will dictate how we move the money.
Yeah, it might not be any need to do it if we can find a school board meeting minutes where that permission was granted based on the town meeting votes, where the voters granted them that ability to move. So, and with that discussion this morning, I haven't had a chance to even look at it or reach out to him. And so, and then the last thing that, money-wise, that, I'm gonna be putting on there is at fiscal year 26 budget, so last year's annual town meeting. I was really proud because it was the first time that there were no mistakes on it. However, when we were transferring the funds and closing the funds kind of from one year to the next, and I was rereading the town meeting warrant, I read the number for the money that is allocated for Cumberland County. And fiscal year 25 budget, it was $214,000 and change. Fiscal year 26 budget, the bill was in the $236,000. So I changed the warrant article, but I made the mistake and didn't change the physical number. And none of you caught it. And so it passed the town meeting and it exceeds, I think it's like 12%. So the town meeting vote where the select board can exceed the department up to no more than 10%. Andrew and I did the math and it's just barely over the 10%. So to be fair, to be transparent and not to wait for when the auditor catches that mistake. If the auditors catch that mistake, I'll bring a warrant article to you to just say as a result of underfunding that in fiscal year 26 to make sure a couple extra $1,000 will be allocated just to make sure that that's proper, so.
Just going back to the way you originally started and use example of the public works being a negative, but the bank account being a positive. So just so I understand, and then I'm kind of curious how we're gonna communicate it to the public. So basically, through the bookkeeping process that we're doing with Trio, we did some errors in the bookkeeping that
So,
makes it that as Mark's worked through reallocating, moving things around, reorganizing, it's left that account showing a negative, but the bank actually, the money's actually there.
yeah, currently being the account in the bank, there's over $17,000 in it. But looking at our books, it's at the end of fiscal year 25, it's in the negative $11,000 and change. And so likely what happened is in a previous year, a journal entry was not done accurately to reflect what was in the bank, which made that mistake, but then we closed out the years and we got audited, and so his recommendation is you're not, like, this number is the number. So you have to fix it, and you going through and figuring out where that mistake was made. You're not gonna be able to bring forth that mistake and say, well, this is a mistake, we can just change the number. You're not gonna be able to. So that's where his recommendation was, because you have such a large surplus, just bring it current to a positive number, and knowing that when we're going into fiscal year 26, we're gonna be adding $50,000 to that account. And so having it be at a positive balance before we start fiscal year 26,
Yeah.
add money.
But in the bookkeeping, I mean, now, so you're saying, take actual monies. And put it in the account to wipe out the negative, but the negative is an error, it's an error
Correct.
of bookkeeping, so say it's $11,000. So, okay, we're gonna put $11,000 into the account and we're gonna document that in our bookkeeping, so now we'll break even, but the bank now is gonna have an additional 11,000 on top of what they actually ordered.
So
I
that,
don't really understand how to fix the problem.
so that may, I guess, I think the town, but the bus is sort of easier one to understand because it had a short time frame. So basically, you know, they had, let's use round numbers, $50,000 in their transportation reserve account. They bought a bus for $90,000. They bought the bus. And they used $50,000 in their reserve account or ballpark. And then they used another, you mean, they bought the bus out of some kind of general fund of the school. And 50,000 was in the reserve account, and they used other excess funds that they had in the school budget to purchase the balance of the bus.
Mhm.
And that did not get reflected back. In other words, they might, because of this rule that they adopted, they might have used money out of, you know, say, special ed fund, I don't know what, you know,
Mhm.
teaching fund.
Mhm.
So maybe they had surplus money in teaching. So they used that surplus money to pay for the balance on the bus, when in fact, if it was restricted like ours would be, they really would have been, you know, spending $90,000 when they only had 40 put away, and they really should have gone to the voters and said, you know, we need 40 grand to do it, the contingency or whatever. So I think it's a matter of, you know, moving stuff around, but at the same time, I think, so it's basically the money has been spent, at least on the bus, from the school general budget somewhere. But it isn't reflected in the reserve account. Does that make sense? In other words, the net outflow was 90 grand. It just didn't all come from the school bus fund. It came from other places, and that's why, you know, it's, and I think what Mark will probably do, but that's why he's coming to this meeting. You know, he might make an adjustment, you know, in other words, the bank account has whatever it has in it. I think we're gonna allocate money, then he may allocate some balance back into the undesignated fund or something like that. I mean, my guess is that there's 2 steps to this process, but I'm not sure. But does that, I think really it's a matter that the thing was purchased. And it was, you know, 90 grand, but we only had, say, 50 in the account. So the money came out of somewhere else, but wasn't, you know, then the track of the expense didn't go back into that,
To the accounts that came from.
Yeah. which it should have. And what they really should have done is made a motion, and maybe they did. If they made a motion as a school committee to move the difference from one fund to another into that fund, then they would be covered. Right? I think so.
And that's what I'm not certain, and I remember some motions happening, I don't remember what they were, and I have to connect with them to double check. As far as the public works, I think it was due to a mistake of a lack of a proper journal entry leading back to prior to Andrew. But because we've been audited and those years have been closed off, he just said, you know, you've got a surplus and then some, so just bring it even, which in my mind, it's, well, if I know the mistake is there, can't we just find the mistake and correct
I'm
it?
with you.
But it's no, because you've already committed, you've audited those years, so you're done. This is what the number is, regardless of whether you think the mistake, it's a mistake
Right,
or
but as
not.
a taxpayer,
So,
and a bookkeeping mistake doesn't bother me as long as the actual money that the town has in total is what we expect it to be.
and it,
It is.
and I think
So it's just,
it is, it's the,
it's
yes,
accounted for in other places.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's gonna be really important to communicate that
Yeah.
well, because,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sitting here and we're done a lot of time talking.
yeah,
about it.
and that's why even with the discussion in asking him about the funds in the reserve account for the solar array and reclassifying that, he gave some really good suggestions about how to word things. And so what I'll do is when I draft these warrant articles, when it comes to those particular items, I will seek his opinion on the wording, but before it even comes to you for a final approval, it's gonna go to the town attorney too for review. And so several eyes will look at it to make sure it makes sense, so then when it comes to the taxpayers, it's a lot easier to explain than me trying to sit here and explain it to you kind of in a way that half makes sense, even to me when I'm saying it. I fully understood it when he explained it, but trying to explain it.
Right.
And you know, if people want, you know, we can always set up, and this might be something we wanna do, we could set up a virtual meeting with Mark. You know, prior to the special town meeting, to make sure everybody's clear, because I do think you're right, it's important the public understands. And I think we have to understand before we go into a special town meeting, and I felt like I could follow him today. But, you know, I probably couldn't replicate it like Vika said, so I think if that, you know, that might not be a bad idea to set up a meeting in January. You know, particularly maybe once Vika has the warrant articles kind of conceptualized, to talk to him. And just sort of, you know, make sure we're all on the same page. Because we are basically cleaning up some accounting mistakes, and we don't wanna, you know, we don't want the public to think it was, you know, we're, you know, it's a mess or anything, but at the same time, I think it's helpful for us to understand it in a little bit more detail.
Absolutely, I would love, because I wouldn't want to ask questions like what I'm gonna ask right now. That meeting.
Yeah.
So one of my questions is, for the school department, with the fact that it can be reallocated within the budget. If there are funds that aren't used, do they go into the town general budget or stay within the schools? Okay, my next question is, so if we're gonna have a conversation about this, understanding the repercussions of it a bit differently than perhaps at the town meeting, when does that conversation happen here? Does it happen when we're meeting with the school around their budget, or is this a separate conversation that we have? Do we talk about it here first and then with the school?
I think it's a three-party conversation with the finance committee. I mean, I think maybe we ask the finance committee to consider it and make a recommendation, and then we have a discussion. That's how, I don't know how the finance committee.
What's the recommendation?
So this is about the latitude that the school adopted.
Yeah,
As their
okay.
time, and so I think the way that I would suggest we go about it is we sort of kick that to the finance committee as a policy question. And what is their recommendation as they're considering holistically, you know, finances for the town? Then we would have a discussion with the school committee.
Thank you.
Ultimately, I think that warrant article was it, you know, only in effect for that year, so they would have to introduce it again, correct? So,
That's good.
Okay, because again, that's an arrangement that works until it doesn't. And then that could be.
well, there were people who were uncomfortable with that at the time, but we really didn't. I think that's right. I now.
It was a quick discussion, everybody.
But I-
Towards the end of the, well, no, probably wasn't.
I think we all
Okay.
thought it was a mistake, or several of us did, and so when John asked the question, I was like, oh yeah, he caught that mistake, but anyway,
Okay, thank you.
it's, you know,
So does that sound like okay for the Finance
Sure.
committee to
Yeah, a couple of quick questions. So we did say we should take a lot of money out of the solar array, and I think we said we would leave $10,000 or five, so it could be paid off in 2038 or whatever. But that would now be below potentially a new capital
Hmm.
level of 20,000, which you guys haven't seen yet or approved. But if that's what Mark's thinking, then all the money could come out of there. You said we're gonna abandon the reserve account. So
That
just
was-
clarity on
Yeah,
how
that was
that
his,
happens
that was his.
and what the amount.
Conversation about the language, when it comes to writing the warrant article, I would have to go back and see what you made for the recommendation to make sure that with whatever I write up is in line with what your recommendation
Right.
was, so I'm not contradicting.
Right, but you could potentially take all the money out with the new
Right.
Yeah.
capitalization definition.
Yeah.
And then you create the general engineering services
Yeah,
account. I think that would be an operating department,
no.
a line item in the operating budget.
No, that was really the basis of the question that we discussed last week. So instead of a line item in the operating budget, his recommendation is that it's a designated fund as opposed to an undesignated fund. The advantage being
Okay.
that it can roll over.
Okay, so however that happens, and it gets tracked through the warrants.
Yeah.
On an annual basis. How do you decide what the starting amount needed is?
I
Because
think,
you talked about transferring the solar array money in there, that's a lot of money.
I don't think, no,
Right now, I don't have a number in mind.
so.
But that would be an annual amount, right? What you think you'd want to. No, well, why do you need to fund it for the future? Well, new money in every year.
Well, no, we probably would. I think if I understood you right, were you thinking of using the solar money to reconcile these two accounts? Or you
So
know,
either reconcile the accounts and or use some of the money to put it towards the general contracted services. What his recommendation was with the general fund about the contracted services. And I keep saying $80,000 just because that's the first number that comes up to me. So the number that is recommended to be put for general contracted services. Have that number be connected with the warrant article, allowing the select board to transfer it onto the next year.
Right.
So. And then when it comes time that is running low or getting ready to run out, then you can revisit and re-ask.
Yeah, so I don't know why you wouldn't do that. I wouldn't want to start with a much bigger number than you think you need.
I think we would keep it pretty small. I think
Yeah,
you're
keep
right.
the gap small and then add to it every year.
I think though that the services are somewhat periodic, they're not, they're not, you
Yeah,
know, and I think that's why he recommended that mechanism, because it's not like every year we know we're gonna spend 20,000. And so I think that's why he recommended, but again, I think that's a question we can ask him. So I don't wanna, I mean, I think that's his recommendation, but I do think there are probably more than one ways to skin the cat, but it made sense to me as he explained it. I don't think people was recommending we take the solar array and dump it into that.
Not
account.
the entire thing,
Right.
yeah.
okay,
No,
okay.
No.
And then kind of back to where Gerhard was going. The good news is the undesignated fund balance based on the work is bigger than we thought.
Right.
But did the reserve account balances go down?
So based on how things are now, the reserve account balances are only slightly different because of that school transportation and.
Okay, there are no other big differences. Okay,
And he said with the work that he's doing now and the little bit that he still has to do, he doesn't anticipate any major differences from when he's gonna be completely done with fiscal year 25, which when we were talking about, when Carol got off, when we were talking about the undesignated fund, and raising that question. Because the number was so big, I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding it clearly, and where he said, once I mentioned to him what the select board allocated in fiscal year 26 budget, what he's saying is, based on the numbers as they were this morning, with the fiscal year 26 undesignated fund of the $200,000, as long as there have been no other special town meetings where we've allocated funds, which we have not had any, the number as of this morning was 901,000, which is several $100,000
Right.
more than what we
Yeah,
predicted.
and that's great news.
Yeah.
And we just all need to understand kind of
Right, so,
where that came from, and hopefully it was money that was in the checking account that we didn't know was there,
so,
in the general fund that
right,
over time.
but I think what we should do is between now and the special town meeting, but after the first of the year, maybe before your meeting on the 14th. We should set up a meeting with Mark. And, so people can ask these questions and make sure they're clear, a virtual meeting. And so I think we wanna let him finish, so that he's done and reconcile the accounts. And then I think he can explain so that we can be prepared for town meeting, but also you guys all have an opportunity to ask your questions, because, like I said, I'm just like you guys, I followed him when he explained it, but I would have a very hard time. And I do understand the strategy of like, clear the decks, start here, and because I think, it also goes to show like how valuable are these friggin' audits that we're here now for.
Well, and that's the other part is the fiscal year 24 audit that we've battled for so many months. It looked like nearly half of the final numbers that those auditors gave us, he's reclassified due to cleaning up and finding mistakes and corrections that needed to be made. Which is wild to think that you put so much faith in the auditors who tell you what the final numbers are supposed to be. But in some ways, that was really reassuring because towards the end, I had a really hard time signing off on it because I just felt like there were a lot of mistakes there, but I couldn't explain them. And so that just validated that, which, he's one accountant to another account. But so far I've trusted it, I really do think that the town is not going to regret in his investment.
But I do think all of us have to feel confident in his evaluation as best we can with our skill set, so I think it's important that, we get everybody in the loop to make sure they're comfortable, because that's our primary goal here, the board especially, is, the finances of the town.
I'd have to say, I'd really like to hear his
Yeah.
perspective on how things got so messy. Like, I'm not looking for blaming, but like, from his analysis, what went wrong? How did we get where we were that required him to come in and clean it up? Because I think, I mean, I as a taxpayer want to know that, it bothers me that it seemed like to a certain degree we're flying a little blind, or there was some, there were errors being made and not being caught, and then the auditors didn't even catch them, or maybe they weren't working that hard at it, I don't know. But it'd be really helpful to kind of have someone with a level of confidence come and say, these were some of the things that I found. This is probably how it happened, it's not, he wasn't here, obviously. And this is what we're gonna fix it, sort of.
Yeah, and I think he did explain that to us today, and it's really the way the chart of accounts was combined. So I think he can explain that, and I also think that, I will tell you, well, we're not Washington County, who has, a gazillion-dollar deficit with all the town having to pay in. So I will say that on a scale of 1 to 10, we're probably a 5. I mean, there are a lot worse places than we are, so I think that he did say that to us, we're not in terrible shape, so don't get
Right.
too anxious about
We're
it.
finding money that we have.
And that's the good news,
Yeah.
right? Right, but at the same time, it's like,
It's like your own bank.
Yeah, I mean, if you start having funny things happening, you wanna know.
It's like
why.
my one kid versus the other kid, how to manage their finances.
Oh, okay.
And could that meeting happen? Does it need to happen at night? Can we do it? in the
No, I
day?
think we should do a virtual meeting during the day, but
During
I
the day.
think what we'll
That would
have
be
to do is,
Thank you.
I think, looking at the first, maybe the first week of January, and, we're gonna have to just set a meeting and based on his availability and
Yeah.
whoever can make it, we can record it, so, and it might have to be a notice meeting if it's the whole board, so. But and then the finance committee,
I
but
think that's
I think it would be
That's a
important.
great idea.
Yeah, and then people will be here in person, on the 14th,
Okay.
which is also before the special town meeting, so that gives us 2 shots to get it straight.
Yeah.
And then we'll have the finance committee stand up at the special town meeting and explain everything.
Yeah, if we can just get to a stern level of understanding. So when we get cornered on the boat, we can at least look like we know what we're talking about, that'd be great.
Yeah, because I'm not sure people will be thrilled to say, well, you found money, yeah, that's not great either, so anyway.
Yeah.
So right now, we have these warrant articles, I did want to, before we move on from this, I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to include, I will say that we had a plan initially to have a special town meeting in the late summer and one of the things we were gonna address was the fact that over a year ago, we adopted the FEMA flood maps as required, so in June of 24. We adopted the FEMA flood maps because we're required to, and, the basis, the 100-year flood is the basis for our resource protection zone, the boundaries. And so what we didn't understand until someone pointed out to us, is that we actually have to notify the property owners where there's been a change on their property from the 1972 basis of the resource protection zone to this new zone. So in other words, what FEMA map is 100-year floodplain is what is by definition the boundaries of the resource protection zone. And we thought that just was an automatic thing, so the new map is the new zone. But we actually have to go through a process, if I understand it correctly, of notifying coastal property owners that have been, they'll see a change on their property. So our GIS person created a map where you can slide it back and forth and look at your individual property. But we are now a year plus past when we really should have done this, and we haven't made much forward progress with the planning board. I think the time is a little compressed at this point to really try to, we do have to notify a bunch of property owners, but I do think at a minimum. We should, send a message to the planning board that we really need to get this done. And because there's no real decision making here, it's a notification process for property owners. If they don't think that it's a valid location on their property, they can go through a process with FEMA to modify that. But it's not something that, we're gonna change ourselves at town meeting. So, but it has to go through both a notification process, public hearing, because it's a change in the shoreline zoning ordinance. And then ultimately has to go to a town meeting vote. So I was hoping that we could do it at this special town meeting, but the planning board is still kind of looking at it. I'd like to instruct the planning board, if the select board is willing to prepare to, bring this warrant article to the June 26th town meeting. And I was really hoping also to pull it off because, that town meeting is pretty big. And I thought if we could tackle it either earlier this year or in the January one, it would just have been easier. But anyway, I think we need to get this done because by then it will be 2 years out. And why it matters is that there are some projects that are being constructed that might have different requirements if these maps were effective. I mean, and you can argue it both ways. I mean, I think it's sort of a gray area in my mind, having talked to a couple of attorneys. The bottom line is, a neighbor could say, well, that's the floodplain and, you can't build that there. And so, anyway, I think we need to kind of get our ducks in a line. And so if the board is comfortable with that, I think it would be good to, you know, ask the planning board to make that a priority.
If push comes to shove and so somebody has a particular project going on. What takes precedence, our zoning or the flood map as determined by?
They're two separate things. So right now, we have floodplain, we have a floodplain ordinance, we have a shoreline zoning ordinance. The floodplain ordinance has requirements that we have adopted under that ordinance. The shoreline zoning ordinance has definitions, and technically, by definition, you know, the floodplain is the resource protection zone is the new maps. But what was challenged in the town of Scarborough was that if the property owner hadn't been notified of a change, then they were, you know, they weren't gonna be obligated to follow the new maps. So it's really a notification process, but it's literally going through all the steps of sort of adopting a new ordinance. It's a new map, it's not a written ordinance. So it's really adopting a new map. And I think we have all the tools we need to do that, so I just, because we really have to start in January if we wanna set up the schedule so that it will be adopted in time.
Cause it requires hearing, notice the newspapers, a lot of those processes that. With the hearing, I believe it has to be 30 days.
Yeah.
In advance, it has to be advertised before the hearing, so. This time frame with this meeting, it is, I think at this point, unrealistic.
Right.
But it is something that needs to start
Can the new
this
map,
time of year to make it in time for June.
can the new map that's been adopted, not adopted by us, but it's been put forth by the government? Can that be contested?
That has been adopted by us. So the new FEMA map has been adopted by us. And every individual property owner who's affected by that map can basically contest it with FEMA. They have to do it on a property by property basis.
Right.
Some towns, way back historically, did it as a town collectively, but it's called a letter of map provision, and you can go and make it changed. But we adopted, as required by federal law, those new maps. Those new maps form the basis. So by definition, when you move into our local shoreline zoning ordinance, just like everybody else in the state of Maine, the definition for resource protection refers back to those maps. So now that we've adopted them, we need to be using them. But what I understand is the hiccup is we have to first notify the property owners and then technically adopt the revised map. We've had somebody do the revised map, we can tell which property owners are, we have a map that they can see what the changes are, so I think we're good to go. So it's just a matter of kind of, and I think and I've been on the planning board, I can attest to this myself, it's a pretty long timeline, believe it or not, to kind of make it to the town meeting. You kind of have to start right after the first of the year, and you wanna have a public hearing that allows you. In this case, it's kind of moot because you can't really make changes, but say you had a zoning ordinance, the idea of a public hearing is to take public feedback, then go back and maybe revamp and then have another public meeting. So you really want to allow for at least two. It's not so important here. But I think we need to notify, you know, most of the coastal property owners. What the DEP suggested is just notify them all, actually our town attorney, just notify all the shorefront property owners in that way. Because what some towns do is they only notify people where there were changes,
Right.
but just to cover our bases, just notify anybody on the shore and they can take a look. And if they have questions, we should be able to answer the questions, but it's a planning board function typically. We could jump over the planning board and do it ourselves. I don't recommend that, but it could be done. So anyway, just while we're on the topic of this, because I am frustrated that we aren't able to finish that up. So anything else on special, but if no other topics people feel should be addressed at the special town meeting? Okay, no, nothing else on your end?
I might bring forth a recommendation to a couple changes on the select board ordinance, but that's just minor, removing where posting takes place and things like that, which doesn't require anything but a couple little language changes.
But this would be a good meeting for housekeeping changes to ordinances, and there might be some that the planning board has, so we can, I will ask. Or actually, I will have Paul or Vika ask the planning board if they wanna do, because they would need to get that together. All right, so we'll move on to so in the packet is just a form that, we put together. We have asked for the past few years, we've asked all the town committees, boards and commissions to report to the select board. So we know what they're doing and, you know, we are aware of where there are vacancies and where there aren't vacancies. And so I just put together this form that's in the packet based on what I've seen that other towns had. I try to kind of meld it together from other sources. Again, I would suggest we make it a fillable PDF. And some of this stuff will be the same from year to year, you know, as numbers. Some of the information. It's a fairly, you know, we're asking for a fair amount of information, but I think we have a lot of committees and we have a limited number of, you know, people. And so I think we really have to be sure these, you know, committees are functioning and progressing, and it sort of is aligned with the, you know, committee guidelines that we sent out, sort of just making sure everybody's kind of following a you know, a good public process in their meetings and, you know, people know when the meetings are, and I would say the finance committee is probably the most stellar of the examples in terms of they always post their meetings, they're open to the public. I mean, I think they really have a very good process going. So every committee chair will be filling out this form, but again, just like the nonprofit form, if you wanna, you know, I'd like to finalize it by Christmas, and so if you have any comments, you can, you know, provide them. To me, and we will, and to me and Mika, and we'll edit it. So, does that sound okay?
Yeah.
All right. Next thing is, so we talked about this at a couple meetings ago, the ETIP funds until 25/119 is to discuss an update on the status of the energy collective purchasing project and the request to use ETIP grant funds to support the project. So Vika put Ellie's memo back, you know, in the packet, you saw this before. Ellie's recommendation was to approve $2,000 of ETIP funds to support the barging and freight costs associated with the project. And it's really the project that Anthony Dixon from remodeling and HVAC is doing, so there was a bunch of energy audits, but that guy didn't need a ton of equipment, so it's really the cost to barge the big trucks over. So I got an update from Anthony in person the other day, and because I had heard, he had emailed me and said he wasn't sure he's gonna be able to finish all the projects, you know, I just wanted to know where we stand. So his plan, and he thinks he will achieve it, is to try to get all the heat pumps in before the end of 2025. That's because those are eligible for both federal and state rebates. And if they go into 2026, they'll lose the access to the federal rebate, which is significant. So he is making a concerted effort to get that done. He's got them all over here, and that's what he's prioritizing. I don't know how many installation people he had altogether, but he's got 4 households left. One of them is mine. And he will have to come back in the spring to do that. He wasn't sure about the status of the sort of incentives, the financial incentives. They're not as generous as the heat pumps. So, you know, for like a $4,000 installation project, I don't remember.
Well, mine was $1,100 project and the rebate was 500.
Oh, so that's more.
Pretty significant, yeah, I only paid 600.
But I think there's a cap, so if you had like a $6,000 one, I think it would be less money, right? So I think that's why, that was part of the reason I prioritized it, because on the heat pump side, we're talking about several $1,000s. So anyway, that's where it stands. I say he's a good guy, he's made a concerted effort to try to do this, and it's just his, you know, just an introduction to the island and logistics and the timing. And then that Ellie also left for a different job. So I met with the CCAT team tonight, which is also the folks who do the ETIP project, and just ran this by them again. They would still like to see an allocation of $2,000 to go towards just the transportation costs. That way it gets split evenly by all the participants in the project. So that still stands as a recommendation. So I think tonight this is sort of, we won't bring it up again after this, but I guess I'd like to put it back on the table. I told LA Wood to see if, how people feel about that. Also, I would say that Lorraine, who's been embedded in ETIP, did hear from the grant person that, better to spend so the funds have been awarded upfront, but they are recommending that we spend them, just, not sit on them, because they don't expect that they'll get clawed back, but they just said, we should spend it.
We did just receive a bill from CTC, the monthly travel log, and there are several $100s worth of expenses that he put on the town travel log coming and going. Which CTC had notified me asking whether that was okay. My response was, to my knowledge, no. I'd have to ask the board. And then the travel log proceeded to be used for the rest of the month. So we're now sitting on a bill waiting to see which direction this takes in before we can make the determination. But regardless, from that experience, when we meet with CTC, my recommendation is that we eliminate the piece of paper on CTC, because when people get on the boat and they're coming to the island for whatever reason and they don't know what to fill out, they're filling out the town of Shibig Island travel log. And it's just easier if we don't have it. And so having that happen with several $100s worth of expenses was kind of the final straw of, if people are coming for the town, they've communicated with us. We've made the coordination, and we're just, for CTC and for the town, it's becoming too much of a back and forth. And so
I think it would be better if they just charge the town. I mean, and I think in this case, we can refuse to pay those fees and they can be charged back to contractors or whatever. But, I think if, I just wanna put it back on the table, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it.
Motion on this to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. It's
So-
grant funds that sit in the town accounts, so.
Right. And it was foreseen that there was possibility that we would use it for this, right?
Yeah.
Or this is within the scope?
It's definitely within the very flexible scope of this grant.
Okay, well, I think, last time we talked, some hesitation,
Yeah.
there was hesitation because we didn't know if some of the work was gonna actually get done. But it sounds like now, at least the big ticket items are gonna be done by the end of the year, so I feel pretty comfortable.
and it's not taxpayers.
Right.
That's the big.
That's a good one.
That's the big one.
But this was a new program. I know that it was done with so many challenges, getting contractors to come give
Yeah.
quotes.
Well,
Getting contractors out here and back and forth is a challenge that we appreciate, that it's easy to underestimate. And the fact that he's making the effort to get the big ticket items done is a good idea. But I would clearly support
Yeah.
this
I think
funding.
it shows a good faith for the select board supporting Ellie and the work that she's done and following through with her recommendation.
Absolutely. So
So, should we make?
Does somebody make a motion?
let's make a
So to
motion.
make a motion that we approve the use of up to
I would say
$2,000.
make it a specific amount, because we know we have that much,
It's 2,000.
yeah.
So, make a motion to approve the use of $2,000 of ETIP funds to, cover the cost of, or help cover the cost of barging and freight associated with the installation heat pump installation process. Does that work?
Yeah,
Second.
okay, got a second, any discussion on this?
Just a follow-up question, if for some reason it exceeds above and beyond that, then that's on them to figure out.
I think it's simpler for us to just give them a lump sum and that goes to reduce the cost. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And in my mind, barging freight and, you know, whether you want to include, I mean, transportation barging costs, you know, I think that's what we're saying, right?
Should the motion be changed then?
No, I think it's okay. So but I think it's simpler to just give a lump sum rather than if it's $3,500, or I just think we just do it that way.
Now, do you anticipate that the town issue a $2,000 check directly to this vendor for $2,000 out of E-tip? And have them delegate the
That's a good
cost?
question.
Or do we keep track of? So what would happen is if it's within the town keeping track of the $2,000 expense, we would. Figure out, you know, what the costs have been and trying to proportion allow it and have Andrew keep track of it until we reach. So I guess who this $2,000 goes to might be a factor to consider.
So
How many contractors we talking?
it's just one guy. I think that my understanding is between the two barge trips that he'll exceed the $2,000 by a fair amount. So it makes sense to me that he could, you know, he could, you know, I think we could either pay CTC or we could pay him. I don't think it matters, but somebody has to show that the cost exceeded, you know, $2,000. I mean, I think what we could do is he could, I don't know if he's paid CTC for the barge trip this fall or not, you know?
We haven't received a barge bill, but for all of the transportation coming and going on CTC, that's on a November bill.
And that's just human people going back and forth. So I think what we could do is have, I think he, maybe, I don't know, I guess, whatever you think.
For the town, for budgeting purposes, the easiest, cleanest thing would be if the select board appropriated $2,000 to the vendor to contribute towards costs of barging and transportation. And have figure it out, and then we contact CTC and say, this cost for these November charges, you need to charge this individual.
Okay.
Because otherwise,
Yeah.
it's gonna be time and effort for Andrew to go through and keep track of every $8 or whatever the cost of each individual trip. And that's just a tedious task.
But I think one thing we will want him to do though is to, at some point, I mean, I don't mind paying him up front, but I think we want him to demonstrate that his costs actually at least reach $2,000 for those activities, so that we have that on our, that makes sense. It could be after the fact, but, and I think he might.
Well, also, they pay his bills.
But did he know that he was going to be paying for all these trips? Or when he signed the paper, did he think, oh, this
He
is like,
told CTC that the town told them that the town will cover all barging and transportation costs, which I never said
Yeah, we
that,
never
and
said, I
I
think-
don't know, and as far as we know, nobody in the town said that.
okay,
No, and I don't know what Ellie, I think Ellie did not say that, I think she maybe said that she would try to get some funds for that, but I think, you know, I think Vika's strategy makes sense to me, and I'll let Ellie know, you know, to make sure she's comfortable with that, but I do, and it's not gonna cover all the costs. So the rest of the costs will get distributed amongst the customers, and he's gonna have to figure that out. So.
just as long as, just keep us posted if it's not working.
But I do
I
think
think
that's,
keeping him in, so that he would come back. Now that he understands how things work.
Yeah.
Be nice that he would continue to provide this service to the island.
yes. And CTC could also, I think CTC give them any free, anything?
Ellie asked for this particular project if CTC could waive or give any discounts, and the answer was no. So they didn't give that to the town, I can't imagine that they gave any discounts to them.
Thank you.
Yeah, all in favor?
Yeah. Want to say anything? Not good. Yeah.
So the last thing on the regular agenda is the proposal from GEI that was in the packet, and I have to give the GEI, a lot of credit for getting it to us, because I know she's got a ton of stuff going on. And so the basic thing we would wanna do tonight, our job, hopefully we read it, but basically, if you read the proposal, money, the cost of this, this estimate was, I think it's 125,400. And so I think that money would come out of the FEMA money.
Yep.
So we have the money available to us. We did get confirmation from the FEMA grant guy that you can use it for engineering. So, I think that's fine. I think we should, I remember that his budgeted amount was significantly less, so we should just, run that by him. The other thing I think that a couple people noticed in this proposal is the timeline. So the goal here was to get a cost estimate, to actually go out for bid and have a response to those bids in time for town meeting, right? Because so that we have a reliable cost estimate for town meeting.
I reached out to Lisa about the timing of this, and I'm going to read you what she said. So she said, as it turns out, there was a typo in the proposal. I initially included the cost estimate with the final design only. However, understanding that you would like a clear cost estimate for June town meeting, I included a construction cost estimate as part of task 3 during the preliminary design development. I should have reflected this in task 3 schedule. Since task 3 is anticipated to be completed by March, we expect to have the detailed engineer option of probable construction cost available by that time.
So the goal is to get, it won't be a bid cost, then it will be their best estimate of what the construction cost will be, but I do think that is enough to go to town meeting with. And then we can discuss how we might cover whatever gap there might be in the funding between what FEMA's given us and what their estimated cost is. Then beyond that, just so you're clear, she's adding these 2 optional tasks and they are included in the budget, which is fine. 8,700 and 35,500. And those are if we wanted to hire the engineering firm to take care of the bidding process, and also if we wanted them to oversee the construction while it's happening. And so, I think so we don't really need her to make any changes, or we could, how do you see that after talking to her?
I think that's up to the comfort level of the select board, from this particular. I personally think with everything the town has going on, while it is a significant chunk of cash, as long as FEMA is okay with it, if we're able to have the assistance of the bid phase and construction, and that's money that could be allocated from FEMA, then I think that would be a good use of those funds. The biggest concern I had was whether we would have a close enough number to know by town meeting, to know what to go to the taxpayers with. And her response is, giving me enough confidence that, I would be comfortable signing this, but what that would mean is that you as a board are comfortable with this proposal, in which case you would make a motion authorizing me to sign it. In which case I would then reach out to her and we would try to set up a preliminary meeting sometime at the beginning of January to really kick things off and start that process going.
So my question is, if the GI is going to provide the final design and cost estimation, how confident can we be that the bids would be accurate to that?
That's what happens in order to, we could have, the other alternative is to wait for the bids to come in and do a town meeting after that, but typically what towns will do is sort of, we'll have the FEMA money. There's gonna be an estimate.
Okay.
We're gonna have to figure out how to cover that gap. I think trying to have that conversation sooner rather than later in June makes more sense.
Yeah.
I think the difference, if the bids come out widely different, which they do sometimes, then we would have to kind of revisit the
Okay.
cost aspect. So some towns, like I forget, some town did a fire department building. And they allocated all the money and then it came in at like much higher. And so they had to go back and get more, make a decision as a community what they're gonna do. I think bottom line is with the FEMA money, we kind of have to do this if we want to use the FEMA money, so like, we're kind of gonna do it.
Yeah.
It's what it's gonna cost.
Okay,
I
sounds
think
good.
if you wait until you have the bid and those numbers, you're gonna miss the town meeting in June,
Okay,
which is just gonna have an extra special town meeting, an extra cost to the town. I think you'd have enough to go with here. So far with the work we've done GI, I mean, I yet to find a big enough flaw in their work that would bring a concern, and the original estimates from the original proposal, they stated that those estimates were based off of real projects that they pulled and had worked on with similar type of designs.
okay, so enough history is here. Then may I ask, is. First up, I want to say I agree with options 6 and 7. There's enough on our plate and I'd like to,
Yeah.
if that's included, that sounds like a great idea. Okay, I'm done with questions.
So I think on that though, the one thing I would suggest is that Vika just run this by the FEMA grant guys, so she knows.
Oh.
I think we might be taking on that cost outside of the FEMA funding, which is also fine. I just think she needs to, first of all, make sure that this engineering estimate is, what percentage of it is reimbursable by FEMA funds? Is it all of it or is it 50%? So that would be just to get that read, so we know. So we know what our exposure is financially, but I do think that we need to go ahead, period.
Okay, great. One last question then. I promise. For the final design and cost estimation, is that information given for the bids? Is that public information? So that when bids are being recruited or accepted,
So they'll do a preliminary design and they'll make a cost estimate for that design, which is this, it's exactly what we did for the stone pier and then, we received some funding. So the other part that's a bit of an unknown that could affect the cost is the permitting. So that is from March to May, but that time frame is not that, you don't always know. And the permitting could then, translate back to changing some aspect of the design, particularly on this kind of a project. So the final design and cost estimation, we'll have a better idea in August, say what that will be. And then the bids are public typically. So there's a very strict process that people use for construction bids typically. And we would probably, the reason we would probably want to do this is it's FEMA money. And I think we need to make, and we are required to do public bid, public.
Yeah, we have to bid it out.
So I think that it's just a question of whether FEMA will cover those costs or whether we have to absorb them.
okay.
And I would not be surprised if FEMA won't cover those costs, just so you know. I don't know.
I don't know, it could be working.
But either way,
FEMA contact is pretty great.
it's great.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we're making a motion, subject to her talk, just confirming with FEMA.
I think we're making a motion to approve this. Vika's saying she's comfortable with Lisa's response to the timeline. But as long as the board is also comfortable, then we could approve this. I'm just asking Vika to, confer with the FEMA person, so we have the information about what's eligible and what isn't. And she could just send that to us and
Yeah, I'll email this proposal to him once, if the board approves it.
Yeah.
In conjunction to letting Lisa know that it's been approved and to start the next steps. I will email this thing to our FEMA contact to see based on what they have in here, if these proposed cost estimates would all be covered under FEMA, or do we need to be prepared to allocate money to cover some of these costs? And then I'll let you know,
That's not,
or forward you the email response.
Anybody want to make a motion on this one?
well. Make a motion for 25-1202 to accept the proposal from GEI for South Shore Drive.
Okay, why don't you just add for,
Authorize the town administrator to sign.
And authorize the town administrator to sign.
Second.
any more discussion on that?
Big day.
Is it big?
Okay, all in favor? We're past our deadline, sorry. We're almost there.
Thank you, John.
All right, now we're into other business.
Okay.
So Weaver, you said you have some in your account. Oh, wait, other business. So other business.
Nothing under other business that would require you to make any kind of,
I do have one item under other business. So before we go into the communication, so.
To add to that.
Yep, so similar to last year, what we did, what I would recommend the board consider is, given that the Christmas holiday, New Year's holiday, which are vacation days for the holidays for the staff, that we also add the Friday after each of those days as a day off for them. Because, you know, that gives them a nice long weekend, and that's just in recognition of, you know, the work and dedication that they've had in this year. And so we did something similar last year, but it's, you know, up to the board, and I'm just looking for feedback on that. David?
I'd like to move that we add those 2 days to the vacation schedule.
Okay,
Is it,
and I
is
guess
it just for this year or?
yeah, I think.
Yeah, it's
saying
from year to
it
year.
this year, and that's what.
I mean, next year is gonna be a different.
All right, so, and I had a second from Richard, so now it's discussion, and Eric, you had questions?
Not related to that.
Oh, okay, so everybody's good with that? So basically, we're giving them
Nick, who
two
wants to
extra
say?
holidays.
a second, I would recommend that it be a holiday versus
Yeah.
vacation.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's
So what
what
you're recommending is that it be a
Sure.
paid holiday, not a vacation.
That's correct. Yeah,
That's what you meant.
that's exactly right.
You meant that.
But you don't mean.
Came up with it.
all right,
So all in favor?
so all in favor?
Thank you to the staff.
Yes,
My question was a quick update. Any word from Axiom?
I have emailed twice with follow-up, and, so I had sent out the initial email and I've received a confirmation, thank you. And since that initial email, I have emailed Mark directly twice asking for a response, and, those emails I have received absolutely no response from.
it's concerning.
It has very concerning.
So I don't know, I think maybe that's something we should think about next steps on that,
Yeah, I think so too.
and. You know,
Yeah,
yeah, but thanks for asking.
so how do we proceed with that?
I think we're at the point where we're not, it's, what's concerning is that we're getting no response. And so I think you emailed first and then emailed to say, did you get it? And then they said, yes, right, or something.
So I emailed the invoice and the information that outlined what the payments have been. That was confirmed of received, and it was stated that they would look into it and get back to me. Since that response to me, I have followed up twice asking for a response.
So this,
And I have not received, so in the last 2 weeks, since you asked me to follow up, I followed up twice, and those 2 follow-ups, I have received no responses.
I mean, to me, it seems like the next letter should be with a CC to our town attorney.
it could be, I would say that, you know, and I've even thought, well, maybe just send a letter from the town attorney, but one intermediate step could be. We could talk to the Island Institute, who is, you know, involved in a number of these broadband projects with Axiom. And, you know, and see if they might, you know, have any insight into the situation, and also might help open the door to a conversation.
Sure.
Because they have kind of a vested interest, because they brought a lot of communities into these projects. I think that's,
Sure,
you know, less,
aggressive.
yeah, less aggressive than just going to the attorney. And so I would recommend, you know, we have Vika reach out to Nick, but he's, we worked on the project and just have a conversation. Maybe she's gonna come back and say, send a letter from the attorney. I don't know, but I think that would be a good middle step. Or maybe she and Nick get on the phone and try to mark that, you know.
And can we hear about this at the next meeting? Can this be
Mhm.
Yeah.
something we talk about? Thank you.
Will do.
Any other communications?
I have a few communications, so I had received a communication from Mike Morse after the select board voted or agreed to not proceed with working with Mike Morse and the abutters around the Waldo Point right-of-way access. And so the email communication was about asking if I was able to grant permission for them to extend onto town property their work. And so I had followed up to receive some feedback from Lisa from GDI about it. And that feedback I did receive, but that wasn't really in time to be able to have an agenda item. And so what I could do is I can forward that information to you and then talk to Carol to see whether the board wants to continue that discussion or even open that discussion or say no, or the other thing is reaching out possibly to the town attorney to see what their recommendation is, so.
So I think we basically didn't want to be a partner in the project. Now he's come back and said, can we expand our project onto your property? And that really didn't come in time to get on the agenda for this meeting. And so I think Vic is looking for some direction on what to do there. And in the interim, she had GEI do a review and they came back with a number of questions. So like, how far do we want to go down that track? Because we do have to pay GEI if we really want them to. I would say they have some concerns about the project design. And I don't know, I mean, this project hasn't even been submitted to the DEP for permitting. So we don't really know where it's going. And so it's sort of a conceptual project still. I would say it's not like it's nailed down in terms of its full design. And so, I don't know that, I think, you know, personally, this is me speaking, I think we're sort of done with this project for the time being. I mean, I don't think if we didn't want to partner on it, that we don't then want it to expand onto town property. I don't think that's compatible with the use of the property. But that's me.
There are too many unanswered questions about the implications of this, and again, we would need to rely on GEI to say,
Yeah.
how does this impact us? And if we're not doing anything, how does that impact? So I think it does warrant having more conversation and looking into it.
Yeah, you have to, there's a bunch of liability questions that come up
Right.
with someone else's contract working on property and
Yeah.
what if it fails in some way that injures somebody or harms somebody? A lot of questions.
And it could be that, you know, expanding it further geographically makes it perform better for the property owners, but we, you know, that's not our responsibility, so, okay. That clear?
Yeah, so future agenda item. So I did receive a communication from the Gurnells, wanted to know if the town and when the town would like to revisit that conversation again.
So this is a piece of property that was before my time, was for probably everybody here. There was a property swap sort of between, you know, with the town and the Grinnells, and then they subsequently discovered that they had limited options for septic systems on that property. And we have given them, or we have suggested they talk to the property, I mean, the code enforcement officer about what their alternatives are. From what I understand from the people who were involved in this project at the time, there was no guarantee of, you know, parking spots on the property, you know, they'd like us to come back and kind of change the boundaries of the property, basically. And I think what I understand from prior select board members is, you know, this was a one-shot deal,
Right.
and it's kind of buyer beware, and,
So the swap actually happened.
Yeah.
Sort of
yes.
happened.
and it was swapped with no compensation, but I don't think the town made a commitment that it was a buildable lot.
And so, and there's a lot of wetlands, so it would cost an extensive amount of money for them to be able to have it be a buildable lot, and the town within the last year, I believe, suggested that there could be an allocation for an easement for them to be able to put a septic system on the town property and have an easement allowing that. And the town was willing to engage in that. They don't like that idea, because what they would like to do is they would like to ultimately split their land and sell some of them and make profit off of it, which an easement wouldn't allow them to do that. And so they're looking for, they had a drawing proposing, a chunk from the town piece, kind of reconfiguring it again. And so it's whether the select board wants to engage in those conversation and continue that, or simply say, no, thank you. This is the same piece of land that the facilities committee is now has re-engaged with Port City in designing a future facility in that location, parking or whatnot, so.
But I
So,
think,
and this was originally there,
Well, it was,
or some of it was wrong.
no,
I thought we already put this to bed.
well, that's.
It was put to bed, and then they came back asking to revisit it and want to continue the conversation.
And I think my recommendation, personally, I think they should work with the code enforcement officer. I think it gave them some options. I think this town is willing to work, you know, to help them out, but at the same time, we don't wanna go back and revisit the property boundary transfer. I mean, that was a done deal, and it's also like, we have a lot on our plate, and this is not the top priority, so. I think we should just,
No,
the direction I would give is that the board, you know, hasn't changed their. That's how I would say it, we have the same position.
Is that consensus with the rest of you?
The general consensus.
but just for my understanding, so probably now we're looking at potential future EMS fire building expansion. How is that related to this?
It's an adjacent property.
It's adjacent.
Yeah, it's.
Okay, so it wasn't involved in the swap at all, it's just an adjacent property.
So what it used to be is it used to be two town properties with a very thin piece of the Grinnells going in the middle.
Huh?
Their piece was completely unbuildable, and so what happened is that got merged, and then you've got the town land, and then Grinnell's got up there. What they found out is that's very wet, and so it cost them significantly more to have a special wetland analysis septic system. I don't quite understand the full language, and so they've asked basically for reconfigure a different chunk of town property and swap things out to put them in the position of being able to take their piece, split it, and have two buildable lots, so they can sell one and make
But they should have done that
a
research.
profit.
That's
So,
true.
Correct, and I think that reminds me, the initial lot that they had was not a practical lot to build up. In other words, it was a pretty narrow strip and really wasn't suitable for like, you know, a housing lot, right? So anyway, I think, oh, sorry.
I think we ought to at least hear their argument, at least hear their case. Yeah, 'cause I don't feel there's enough information really to make a decision, just on the basis of we.
So their most recent cases, they took a piece of paper on the tax map and they drew out
Yeah,
the piece, and so what was asked of them is to provide more detailed, and so in my personal opinion is the detail is lacking, it's just a reconfiguring of a sample drawing and asking the town to start the process, which ultimately would need to revisit kind of resurveying and things like that.
Yeah.
To lead to
I've
that.
got some very mixed feelings about it,
Okay, well-
but I don't wanna just reject it out of hand, I guess.
Okay, so that's an option. So what would you suggest, David?
A more. A proposal that's a little bit more, more final,
Okay,
more,
So-
more specific.
so you're,
What kind of specifics are you looking for? Cause I asked for that last time around and that's what I've received. And so their proposals aren't coming at anything more than just,
Well, I guess
They-
what's the difference
they're
between,
looking for more of a commitment from the town that you're gonna start the process.
okay,
And you're gonna commit to having the town reconfigure the town property to make it so they have two buildable lots that are
Yeah.
left.
I mean, my thinking is they didn't do the homework in the first place. They should do that homework now, if they wanna, they have a reconfiguration idea, they should do all the work, legwork.
Right.
And submit that proposal to the town for our consideration, but that would include like, having septic people come out and do their analysis, and they probably have to get permissions to come on the town land to check parking.
But you
And
can't,
there's-
They probably don't wanna go to all that.
No,
expense
they don't wanna go to
They-
that, but they're asking us to.
Without us, without getting the temperature from us on whether they.
Right, but we can't get a temperature from us when we don't know what it is that they want, what we
can't
actually want.
recommit.
but we do,
Yeah.
before we say a yay or nay, I think we need to revisit the documents that they did give us. And have it happen in this public discussion, so I'm remembering what they sent,
Okay.
and so I think I would like to add this as an agenda item. To put in our packet what those documents were, so that we can talk about it with the information that
Okay.
we had last time, to see if we want to revisit it or change our opinion or vote on it then.
And the only thing that I will ask is, is this something we need to put on the next meeting's agenda, or can we move it to a time? Cause I think as you see our schedule, we're gonna have a lot to do, so I think we could put it on a future agenda, but I wouldn't wanna commit to January second.
Okay, but then that's okay too.
that's full.
So I think we'll find a good time to do that. I think, and maybe there's somebody on the board, formally on the board that could provide sort of some context, cause
But I'd also like to hear information from the CEO about if there's anything he needs to.
right, but we're not asking for a meeting from the Grinnells at this point. We're basically asking to be brought up to speed on the background on the
Thank you,
project,
that's it.
right? Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on communication?
The other one that is worth mentioning is we did receive some, so with the CDS funding, the $1 million, we did, from when we initially heard that we were gonna receive the money, we did, get a communication from them, basically to letting us know that they're going to reach out to us by, second week in February to start the process, and there's gonna be a lot of paperwork that will have to be filled out, a lot of information provided. Relative to the construction and things like that about the stone pier, so, the work relative to that, I'm hoping that we can, in some way, shape and form, have the funds allocated to possibly Mark help us with that, just to make sure that we have our ducks lined up, so when it comes to having the proper documentation and information, we have everything squared away.
Which funding was this?
So this is the congressionally designated funding for the $1 million that will be received for the stone work from Shelley Pingree office.
And that reminds me that I did acknowledge that right away. They called us like the day it passed. But we owe them a thank you, particularly Shelley, who's been here and, is an island. She's from North Haven. So if you reach out to Nick, can you ask him, what would be appropriate? Cause he's definitely been a recipient and had other towns be recipients. I'm not exactly, I think we owe her something from the select board, some kind of thank you and acknowledgement, but he would probably be able to give you some guidance. Cause I just don't wanna forget about that. And, it was a lucky break. budget for us.
But a few of us.
Okay. Anything else on the communications?
I don't believe so.
So we have the minutes from December 3rd, 2025, which was our last meeting, and what's your turn?
Move to accept.
Okay, and,
Let's see, what is it?
I need a second. Okay, any discussion? All right, all in favor? I'm gonna skip past items to the future agenda because we discussed that tonight. Ooh, I forgot we had an executive. I'm gonna vomit here in.
It'll be less than 10 minutes.
Okay, so we have movement.
Far less than 10 minutes.
So we actually need a motion to continue this session.
So moved.
No, you gotta read it.
Yeah, better read it. Okay.
You take it back.
Yeah, I'd like to move that pursuant to 1 MRSA 6A personnel, we move into executive session.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Yeah.
Yeah. Richard's absent, but that's just